So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kerry Hannard and I'm the Chief Exec of the Global Sourcing Association. And welcome to our SourcingTech series event. So the GSA has been running this series of events looking at different technologies and what they actually mean for our community and how our members, both on the buy side and the provider side, can bring these technologies into their sourcing arrangements. So I'm joined today by a couple of experts in their field who are going to be talking us through their understandings and best practice for the adoption of artificial intelligence, which is what this SourcingTech series is all about. And also going to be joined with a user of artificial intelligence. So hopefully we're going to cover all the bases of how to build a business case and what really to look out for to ensure that artificial intelligence is successful within your organisations or that you deliver a successful artificial intelligence program. So I'm going to ask that we make this as interactive as possible. So please do put questions in the chat. And I think we're going to be doing about 10 minutes each in terms of conversation, presentations from our speakers, and then we're going into a full sort of Q&A panel discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to used to be my colleague on the GSA Council, but long-time friend as well. So introducing Andrew Burgess, who is a strategic advisor and expert and author in AI. So over to you, Andrew.
Brilliant, thanks, Kerry, and hi everybody. Yes, as Kerry said, I'm an independent advisor on artificial intelligence. I've been doing this for about 6 years now. Prior to that, I was actually, and hence my involvement in the GSA, I was a sourcing advisor as well, so for about 15 years. So hopefully I've got both perspectives of implementing AI, but also from the sourcing side as well. I'm an author as well, as Kerry said. I authored the Executive Guide to Artificial Intelligence, which was published a couple of years ago by Paul Grave Macmillan, available in all good bookshops, and also expert in residence at Imperial College at their Enterprise Lab, and also visiting senior fellow at Loughborough University for RPA and AI as well. So today I'm going to talk to you about how to start your AI journey and really about how to avoid those pitfalls of sourcing AI. So I think one of the key messages I want to get across to you and put very well by Public Enemy back in 1988 is don't believe the hype. There's so much froth around about AI, a lot of it driven, by movies, what people see, what people read. Lots of inflated claims from particularly the big tech companies about what their AI can do, and also the journalists and people writing articles around that kind of inflate that even further, and that leads to a lot of confusion with people. So the first thing to do is kind of get rid of all that froth and understand exactly what AI is. And I think the key thing here is if you're the person responsible for introducing AI into your organization, is what you really have to do is manage those expectations. I think it's really important for people to understand what AI can do, but also what it can't do as well. There's many brilliant things that AI can do, but it's not the silver bullet for everything. So make sure you understand exactly what it can do. And a good way of managing those expectations is to understand your ambitions with regard to AI. And it's really good at the very beginning of any journey to understand how far you want to go with AI. And there's a whole range of things you can do. AI is a very flexible, diverse technology, or as a group of technologies really. But start by understanding your ambitions. So do you just want to improve the efficiency of some processes? Which is fine, AI can do that. Or, at the other end of the scale, do you want to fundamentally transform your business through AI? And there's obviously lots of different gradations between the two as well. But how you start your journey will really depend on those different ambitions. The first step you take will be different, whether you're improving processes or whether you're transforming your business. So having that big ambition, the view of where you want to go, Somebody's not on. There we go. Understanding your ambitions, I think, is really, really important. And a mantra that I often use is think big, act small. So work out your mission, work out your objectives, but start that process with those small steps. Make sure that you get the buy-in at the beginning of the journey. Make sure your risks are well managed, and I think that's a really good mantra to kind of kick off everything with. One of the things that I see as well, and when I ask people about what their ambitions are with AI, is, well, they say they just want to tick the box, say they've got some AI, which is completely the wrong question, completely the wrong approach to take. And if potential clients tell me they just want to have AI in for AI's sake, then they're not worth advising, because it's just doomed to fail. The AI has to be really value led. You have to have those objectives to aim for. The value of the AI it needs to be clear. So it's really important to ask the right question. So people come to me and say, how can I use AI in my business? Or even to the point of, can I have an AI, please? And completely the wrong questions to ask. So think about what your objectives are, what your challenges within your organization are, and then what are the opportunities for AI to meet those challenges and to meet those objectives. And that's the best way to get this value-led AI approach. And it may be that AI isn't appropriate in your organization, which is fine, and you've saved yourself a lot of effort and frustration in doing that. But generally, I find within any organization that at least has some data, there will be value from AI within that organization. And what we try and do is create a list of all those different opportunities. And typically you can find 30, 40, sometimes 50 different opportunities for AI within the business. And then you can start to rank those opportunities by the business value that they'll deliver, how easy they are to implement, and any other criteria that you may have. So you've got this long list of opportunities, which you can then summarize into a heat map. That can build a business case from that, and as well as a roadmap of how you're going to implement that strategy. Because you can start, thinking, well, there might be some data cleansing you need to do. There might be, the proof of values is usually a good place to start. So the proof of values will be the ones at the top of that list. Which are the ones that are going to give us the highest value at the lowest risk, and that's the best place to start. So that AI strategy is really, really important for any organization to understand, and that's the bit, going back to that think big, act small. Developing the AI strategy gives you both of those. It gives you that big ambition. Here's where we want to go, but starts off like, here's the roadmap for the next 6 months, next 2 years, etc. The last thing I wanted to say, and this may sound obvious to anybody sourcing anything, but is particularly important with AI, is understand what you are buying. AI is a very complex technology. There's some very complex mathematics going on within that, but people don't need to understand that. What you need to understand is the capabilities of the technology, what it can do for your business. And within the book that I wrote as well, I use a framework for categorizing AI and talk about it in non-technical terms. So that's a useful way to get people on board, and educating your senior management, your senior executive team around that sort of framework, I think, is really, really useful, because no senior executive is going to invest money and effort buying something that they don't understand. So the education piece, I think, is really, really important, both from if you're a sourcing person or a senior executive. So once you've understood it, then how do you actually buy AI? And I think the easiest way to think of this is simplified down into 3 different approaches. The first one is through a vendor, a software vendor. So if the opportunity that you have for AI exactly matches the capabilities of a vendor, then that's definitely the best way to go. The vendor's done all the hard work in developing the algorithms, creating the UI, etc. So why wouldn't you then go to that vendor and say, implement the software, you pay your subscription fee per annum, and you probably have to do some training within that, but you can get yourself up and running relatively quickly by using the vendor approach, and you're starting the AI journey. At the other end of the scale, you've got this bespoke approach. So you might have a data set that nobody else has, a unique data set, and you think there's some value there from that data that's going to give you some huge competitive advantage. So at that point, you're going to need some sort of bespoke development. You're going to need to bring in some data scientists, some AI developers, some ML ops people, etc., to build something that's going to create this huge value. It's going to be hard work, but potentially the value is going to be massive, so it's going to be worth the effort. Between those two extremes of vendor and bespoke work, there's what I call a platform approach, which is really the best of both worlds. So if the vendor, you can't get enough flexibility, or it doesn't quite match what you want to do, and you don't want to have all the cost of the data scientists coming in, then this middle approach using data science platforms gives you kind of the best of both worlds. It still does require some data science input, but a lot of the mechanics are taken away of the data wrangling and the pipeline management of building the AI models. And essentially these platforms use AI to find the best algorithm to apply to your problem. So there's a number of different platforms out there, like H2O or Able or Data Robot, for example, that do this. And it's a really good approach because you can get the flexibility that you need, so you can build whatever models you want to give you the value, but also you get the transparency of exactly what's happening. So you don't get that kind of black box approach of we're giving data to a vendor, we're getting the answer back. You can actually see what's happening. You do tend to need some support in that, but that for me, that's kind of a really good approach to take. So hopefully over the last 10 minutes, it's given you an idea about how to start your AI journey, and particularly about trying to avoid some of those pitfalls that people fall into when they're starting that journey and trying to source AI. So with that, I'll hand back to Kerry.
Okay, that's brilliant, Andrew. Thank you very much for that. I have got some questions, but I'm going to hold on to those in case they're actually answered by Adrian, who's next up. So Adrian. Adrian is actually, or has been, a client of yours. So I'd like to now hand over to Adrian Odds. So Adrian is and has been Director of Strategic and Market Propositions, and obviously a customer of Andrew, perhaps in the world of AI. So over to you, Adrian.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, I worked with Andrew last year when I was Director of Strategy and Market Propositions for a large corporate. I'm currently building out a consultancy based around value proposition and purpose, so helping businesses change and build foundations for growth based on the value that they create. So working with Andrew over the last a couple of years, it has been a really fascinating journey, and we knew quite early on that we needed a specialist, a trusted advisor to help us to navigate what is a very frothy market. And by the time Andrew joined us, we had a pretty clear view of the problem that we were looking to solve. So we knew what the proposition was that we wanted to attack. And we knew also quite early on that we were in the realm of buy and not build. Partly that's a strategic view of how the technology environment was developing and the digital transformation agenda within the corporate. And that often includes a shift to cloud and a shift to access over ownership. So that fit very much with the approach that we took here. But also the market is moving so fast and changing so rapidly that we wanted to be really confident that we could add or remove components from the platform as necessary, and as new players and new functionality emerged over that period. So it was a platform approach that we took. We weren't able to find one tool to rule them all, and therefore we wanted to bring a couple of the best tools possible together. And the challenge that we were looking to answer, the business problem that we were looking to answer, was the ability to analyze unstructured, human-generated, free-form content. So, when humans try to engage with each other, it's not always easy. We don't always express ourselves very straightforwardly. And traditionally, unstructured content has been very difficult to analyze, and has relied on large teams of humans to understand what this individual requires, what the case resolution outcome should be, whether it's high risk or low risk or value, and no tool really existed to be able to do that. There are some tools that enable you to, in quite a binary way, classify content, so you know kind of what it's about. But sentiment, intent, those elements of analysis were really tricky. So that was the problem that we were looking to solve, and we wanted to be able to apply this tool into any work stream. This would become a revenue generating proposition for the business. And if you look at a service work stream, you will typically find a range of case types within it. Depend on whether it's an external mailbox like a complaints or inquiries, or an internal mailbox around a business process. But typically there's probably an 80-20 rule. 80% of the cases in that inbox turn up regularly. They're relatively easy to understand what they are. 20% of them are either fraudulent, dangerous, or impossible to learn. And then within your 80%, you've probably got a whole bunch which are really simple, either requests for simple information, requests for support or reassurance, or documentation, or status, those sorts of things, which typically a customer or a user could go to a frequently asked questions or to a terms and conditions to get their resolution. But in any kind of service inbox, your teams are spending the same amount of time processing that low value, low impact stuff as they are processing the fraudulent, dangerous, and high value stuff, and that can't possibly be right. If we could find a way to process that simple, easy to understand stuff, that would free up time, improve customer experience, decrease risk, and so the use of the business case there was very, very strong. So what we were looking to do ultimately was to take the content, understand it for meaning and intent and sentiment, match it to a record so we know who it was from and what the context of their engagement was. Then to be able to look up to other systems of record to build other context around that case, and then ultimately in a future state to then be able to create a next best action. So that would be almost a fully automated response to a request or an inquiry within that inbox. Now at that point, people quite often start to get a bit alarmed, because I'm starting to talk about autonomously responding to customers with no human input. And it's a classic kind of trip up with this technology, which is that you are in complete control of the confidence that you give the process that you've created. So if you are 100% confident that a simple request or inquiry could be answered appropriately, then there's no reason that you shouldn't make it autonomous. You could always put a review, a human review, into that process as a sort of staging post. But ultimately, if it is a request for documentation and you've been able to identify and validate that individual or that account, then there's no reason that you shouldn't then be able to automate that information straight back to that individual and solve that request without human input. There will always be cases in that inbox, of course, which are difficult and challenging and which need human interpretation. But even those, interestingly, over time become learnable, because over many thousands of interactions, even those edge cases start to become familiar to the tool, and you can actually process and train the tool dynamically by running it back through the exceptions process, back through your human team, who are actually teaching the tool as they process these documentation. So that's where problems most often arise, is around exceptions. And as long as you've got a really robust approach to the business rules that you've set and the governance that you've put around the management of those business rules, then there's no reason that you shouldn't cautiously and in small stages create the autonomy that ultimately delivers those big value outputs, which are decrease in time to triage and prioritize those service inboxes, decrease the cost associated with processing them, decrease the amount of risk associated with creating manual errors, because we're humans and we do trip up every now and again, and also getting that big CX impact, which is the main and most important bit. Is the case solved accurately, correctly, and swiftly? Now, I've shared that approach mainly because I haven't talked about AI once, and it's often the case that there is as much value in a cold, hard look at the business process and organizational structure that you've got around what you think is the problem. And you'll probably find that if you were to pay the same attention to that business problem in a pure business way, you'd actually find as much value or significant value from that approach as you would from charging through into an AI solution when actually you've got a poor or a failing process that's not properly staffed or organized or structured. So that's my kind of first watch out is, do the due diligence on the business process that you're looking to solve, ensure that there aren't simpler fixes before you start getting all clever. The second kind of trip up that I wanted to just call out one really is, Andrew's mentioned it already, is around stakeholder engagement. And this is about ensuring that your CEO and your leadership teams are bought into what you're trying to achieve. The key element here is making it CEO proof, because if they understand the value you're creating in simple terms, in non-complex language, you will find the path of your innovation simpler, and there will be decisions to be made, and there will be costs to be addressed and investment to be made, and you need that decision-making process to be as fast and as slick as possible, so that it doesn't delay or interrupt the momentum that you're building as your tool is gaining in sophistication. Second one to look out for is the not invented here paralysis. And large or matrix organizations do have a habit of reinventing things as new when actually something similar may have been in operation as business as usual somewhere else in the business for months. So again, do your due diligence into the rest of the organization to ensure that you are both not stumbling across a territory which you don't understand well enough and actually already exists somewhere else, or indeed that you are then able to build, it does ensure that you're able to then build great stakeholder engagement with all of the individuals across whom you are going to be trampling over the course of the development of your innovation, because typically these the business process that you're probably looking to solve is going to be cross-silo. So you are going to be treading on various toes. So the more engagement you can build, the better. Andrew also mentioned setting a strategic vision, having a good view of what it was you're looking to achieve, the value that you're looking to achieve, both from a value, from a revenue, from a profit point of view, for the future, because then you can that's your big, hairy, audacious goal that you can build towards, and that then also helps with your engagement. The other issue that you might stumble across is one around employee engagement, actually, particularly in the environment that I've just described. There is a cost and effort reduction value to the AI tool that we've described there, and that can sometimes be assumed to mean people reduction, and it doesn't have to. And I think that's really important as well. There's a lot of reporting around the rapid adoption of automation technologies, meaning us all being jobless, and I don't believe that to be the case, at least in our lifetimes. This is a long and complex process, and one which actually, at least in these stages, enables people to be doing what they should be doing based on their skills and experience. When you think about triaging at service inbox, if it's a complex internal process, actually you've probably got a senior individual spending 2 or 3 hours of their day trying to figure out what's in the inbox before they can go on to process the cases within it. So if you can remove that aspect, that person's freed up to be value creating somewhere else. So just one there. And finally, beware chicanery in all its forms, because there are some big promises out there for life-changing software, and the market has moved and is moving constantly. So I can't can't value enough the working with a strategic advisor, somebody who can keep you on the straight and narrow, help you navigate that, make sure that you're focusing on the right things. I got very carried away very early on with the idea of building not just a new proposition, but actually a new business unit, the value of which could eventually outstrip the value of the corporate itself. And needed to be anchored by some realities, which ultimately enabled us to create a proposition which is now in proof of concept with a large financial corporate, and moving along in the way that we want it to. So I think that pretty much that's everything that I had to say. Hopefully you found that interesting, some truths in there, and I'll hand over to Przemek.
Actually, one quick question, which I think we will take now, Adrian, because it's perfect time. So it's a question from Graham. Hi, Graham. So what tools did you use? Andrew mentioned H2O, Able, or Data Robot. Was it one of those or something else?
No, something quite different. So we used Kofax and AntWorks as the two tools within theirs. Our intention was in the future to bring in an orchestration tool. But again, in terms of the thinking big and starting small, the intention ultimately, I had a feeling that within the data that we would be processing at macro level would be a range of insights that were previously unseeable because they weren't being looked at as specific reporting points, but that they would be kind of meta analysis, ability to understand the business better just by looking at the volume of data, and that would have then enabled us to the orchestration layer would have enabled us to then be able to look at those insights. But in order to progress and keep the momentum going, we kept the platform quite small at the beginning, but doing all the things we needed to do.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Right, we'll come on to some additional questions in a moment. So now I would like to hand over to Shemek Berent. Shemek is the Chief Exec of Talent Alpha, and Talent Alpha is a new business, and I believe Shemek will tell the story, but has been built with artificial intelligence at its core. So over to you, Shemek.
Thank you, Kerry. Good morning, everyone. It's my privilege to share with you some of the work that we've done actually last year with Novartis and their business services division. We've been engaged by their innovation team, a team called NBSX, that is kind of looking across the organization on how the emerging technologies could be used to find like a 10x improvements across the various processes within the organization. So in the experiment that we jointly ran with that team last fall, we actually applied some of the AI and machine learning technologies that we are developing within Talent Alpha, and that's what I wanted to share with you today, which is the approach that we've taken, some of the tools that we had back at that time, and also show you how we've taken it since that point last summer to where we are today and where we are heading with it going forward. The use case was how could we improve, the business case was how could we improve the recruitment process for a specific role in one of the shared services of Novartis in Hyderabad, India. We're looking on how we could take a pipeline of candidates that is in thousands and leverage the toolkit that Talent Alpha is developing to help the organization to figure out where in that pipeline of candidates the organization should spend their time to maximize the output of their work. So we call it defining the dream candidate using actually AI and machine learning. So, well, it's been mentioned already today that the key to actually unlock the power of AI is data. And in fact, when you talk about recruitment processes, a lot of times we are dealing with tons of unstructured data. Right? We are talking about CVs, we are talking inputs that are being collected via interviews, and then actually quite a lot of bias kind of embedded in the traditional process. What we've done what we are doing as a company to bring some structure to the data that can be captured about the talent that it's coming into the organization, we've developed this model and a concept that we call the Talents Genome, where all of the information that we are capable of capturing about a given individual is codified first in a concept where we are clustering the different types of information into different categories of tech skills, cognitive abilities, soft skills, and personality traits, but also it's then translated into a fairly innovative data model. And this is the first step where we already use AI and machine learning, because we are using a technique called word-to-vec, where all of that information is codified into vectors that then are placed in the multidimensional space. I know it sounds techy, but you can think about it as each individual or each profile in our platform consists of vectors. When a vector can be a skill, and the length of that vector, kind of all of the other information that we can collect about that skill, such as to what level of competence that skill is possessed, or any other insights that we might have collected through our cognitive psychometric tools that we have developed. So this sits at the core. Like, in order to produce a quality output of any process that is leveraging AI, we need to have a quality input to the process. And I like what Andrew was saying, that organizations should be thinking big and acting small, and that's exactly what we did in this approach. We really started with a very bullish vision. How can we leverage AI and machine learning to improve the recruitment process? But then we divided into a series of small steps, trying to see if what we are doing can really move the mark, that would eventually lead into this 10x improvement. So our platform supported that process from the end to end, and we have divided it into a number of kind of phases in which we were conducting that given experiment. We started with first actually mapping, using our toolkit, the existing organization. We said, let's build the organizational genome map of that part of the organization where these candidates would be joining, just so we can better understand on a very kind of low-level data level on what makes a top performer, a regular performer, or an underperformer. So again, as you will see in a minute, we mapped and understood the individuals who are currently in that role. We basically mapped their talent genomes, so we could start analyzing whether there is some correlation between what their skills, experiences, cognitive traits are compared to their performance. Then we again use this data, as you will see, and we worked with some of the hiring managers involved in the recruitment process to build a digital representation of what we call the dream candidate. A dream candidate is kind of a data model that describes basically the perfect fit to the organization. It might be someone who has actually the skills that are required for the job, but you can also use the dream candidate to improve diversity in your organization. You can actually decide that you want to amplify some other skills and cognitive traits that you want to have present. Having that, we then use our toolkit to take part of Novartis candidates pipeline, and we've built talent alpha profiles and decoded talent genome for the candidates in the process. So at the last step of that, we could actually again use AI and machine learning to calculate the shortlist and help the organization to figure out where, from the hundreds of candidates that were in the pipeline, where they should focus their energy going forward. So diving into each one of these steps, as I mentioned, we started with mapping the existing organization. The purpose of this exercise is to really gain kind of visibility into what is the composition of your talent that you currently have in a given role, right? And you look at it from the prism of both technical skills, but also all of the soft skills that our platform is capable of collecting. And we are talking here about cognitive abilities such as working memory, perceptual speed, or ability to switch tasks, which is something we can measure using a game. Or you can look into their soft skills such as creative behaviors. We're using, again, a scientifically proven tool called a creative behavior questionnaire. We can determine whether someone is a more creative or a heuristic thinker, or looking into their personality by using Big 5 personality traits. Having all of this data combined, you finally see like what is the composition of the unit to which you are hiring for, and you can use this as an input to defining the dream candidate. You can decide, what parts of that genome you want to be more present, such as some of the technical skills that are really required for the job. What types of soft skills you believe are making a top performer, maybe you want to amplify it, or maybe you actually decide that you want to have a bit more diversity, so some of those specific skills in the talent genome can be amplified. And this serves, this dream candidate, this seems kind of as our anchor point to which the algorithm will be then looking for proximity across the entire talent pool that was coming in this particular process. So again, the dream candidate, think about it as a job description on steroids, right? Whether in the traditional job description you would have, on average, as we analyze it, anywhere between 5 to 15 different skills required, very seldom actually any soft skills or cognitive skills listed. This is taking it, at least 10, if not 20x, right? We would build that model where a candidate is defined by 50, 100, in some cases, 200 different dimensions or criteria that allows us to really understand, who we are looking for. Now, where we see taking this concept of the dream candidate forward, imagine often case when hiring managers need to bring someone new to the team, they just think, oh my God, if I could just clone Carrie, right, my life would be so much easier, right? That's kind of the end goal that we are chasing, where we could take the talent genome of that particular person we'd like to clone, and then let the algorithm find the closest person to that given individual in one of the talent pools. So having the dream candidate defined, we then moved into capturing data from the candidates, right? And this is probably a subject for a separate session because that's what our platform is really facilitating, this data collection and collecting also additional insights about the different traits we can identify, where possible, measuring the strength of these particular skills. But I wanted to show you one of the tools that we have developed kind of on the back of this experiment, which is what you see on the screen right now, that we call the instant onboarding, which is a user experience where we are taking the user through a sequence of kind of very quick screens to give us enough information that we can match then this individual to a potential good fit role in the organization. This is yet another space where AI and machine learning comes into play in our solution, because what is really happening, the tiles that you see in this experience, as it will be going through this animation again, are actually determined by the AI and machine learning. So the algorithm on the ongoing basis kind of decides, what should be the next sequence of tiles presented to the user, so we can collect this kind of the optimal amount of information in the shortest possible time. This entire flow takes about 90 seconds, right? Again, it's the algorithm determining what would be appearing on the list, and based on what the other users already gave and what we have in our database when it comes to the profiles that we have already collected. So again, yet another small step where AI and machine learning has helped us is helping us to collect this data. This last step that you see here is that actually where the user is training the algorithm, right? So it is telling us how well we understood their profile, and it's helping us to categorize also the roles to which she or he believes they would be a best fit. And by doing this last step, which you will see on the last screen here, is we are training the algorithm again. So it's a bit of a supervised learning, but the learning is actually done by the user, him or herself. And then having all of those three layers, so again, under the map of the organization, the definition of the dream candidate, and the data we captured about the candidates themselves, that's really when the AI magic started happening. So we loaded that into our TensorFlow model, and again, it's getting a bit of technical, and ran all of this data through our t-SNE algorithm, which is the T-distributed stochastic neighbor embedding algorithm, one of the machine learning algorithms that helps us to find proximity between those profiles. And again, profiles are being defined by the vectors in the multidimensional space, and across the hundreds of dimensions that we've captured in this exercise, help us to figure out who is the closest to that dream candidate. So let me walk you through on what you see actually in this animation. So every dot in the screen represents a profile that we might have in our system, right? The profile might be a candidate that the organization has kind of in the candidate pipeline. It might be the employee, because we've built the map of the organization. It might be the talent that it's coming from Human Cloud. This is yet another part of Talent Alpha offering, where we are bringing actually companies to share talent with one another. now this grouping that you are observing in this screen, this is actually the AI algorithm looking across, thousands of these profiles, trying to find the closest profiles to that dream candidate. And as you can see how the algorithm is iterating through these mathematical calculations. And as we zoom in, you see the dots that are closest to that dream candidate. So in other words, what happened here is the algorithm telling us, across all those different pockets of talent, and again, might be the candidates, it might be the my full-time employees I already have on board, it might be the talent coming from the gig economy or the human cloud to us, where we should invest time, because that's where the algorithm believes we have the highest likelihood of success. The client was quite happy, and we are also quite happy with the outcome of this experiment. We do believe that we demonstrated the 10x efficiency as far as the entire recruitment process is concerned. Not only we've collected significantly more data than in a traditional process, we really shortened that decision-making lifecycle. Right now, we are discussing yet another implementation of this approach within the organization. And with that, I would be happy to take your questions.
Okay, thanks for that, Shemek. Thank you. Right, so I've got some questions. If anybody else has got questions, please do put them in the chat right now. So my first question is, and I must admit, I'm slightly confused by this myself. So we've talked about artificial intelligence, but we've also talked about machine learning. We've talked a little bit about automation. A buzzword obviously is hyper automation and intelligent automation. What is the distinction, and what really is AI, and does AI have to come with automation? So I'm going to ask that question of you first, Andrew.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a common challenge, I think, for people, because all these words are used interchangeably, but actually they're quite different things. Start with kind of the widest definition of artificial intelligence, AI. That is really used to encompass a whole range of technologies, all that try and mimic what's happening in the brain, rather than the automation piece, like robotic process automation, or RPA, which is trying to mimic what people are doing, or physical robots doing what people are doing. AI is trying to mimic what happens in people's heads. So that's kind of the broadest thing. So and people can get a little bit hung up on what is truly artificial intelligence, but as a good catch-all term, AI is very good. A subset of AI is machine learning, and machine learning has been around for the last 10-15 years or so, and as the name suggests, it's where we use the machines to actually do the learning, to build the models. So that's where we're feeding in all this data, and then the machine uses the algorithms to build models based on the data that it's being fed. So that's in the last 10 years and 5 years in particular, because these models got more and more complicated. So another term that people might hear is deep learning. Deep learning is essentially even more complex machine learning, and it's kind of able to do more and more difficult, complex tasks as we go forward. Outside of that, you've got things like natural language processing as well, which I think Adrian mentioned, and Shemek as well, which is looking at looking intent within words, meaning and semantic analysis within text. But machine learning is kind of what a lot of people are talking about in terms of using data within that. The comparison with RPA and automation generally, one of my pet peeves is actually when people talk about this as a continuum of saying that AI is just more complex RPA. They're very, very different technologies. RPA is very deterministic. So RPA bots will do exactly what you tell them to do. So you program them, you give them a workflow, and they do exactly what you want them to do. And that's brilliant for a lot of tasks. The AI piece is probabilistic, so that it works on confidence levels and probabilities. So you might get different answers by doing things slightly differently. So that works really well for some things, but if you've got a regulated process, you want to use RPA to run that process. You don't want the machine kind of thinking of a better way of doing it, for example. So, but if you've got lots and lots of data and you want to get the insights out of it, making predictions, those sorts of things, then AI is the perfect tool for that. The last one you mentioned, I think, was intelligent automation, which is really where people put RPA and AI together, and they do play really well together. They complement each other really well, because there's a lot of things that robots can't do, like manage unstructured data and make complex decisions. So if you've got a process that you've automated through RPA and you want part of the process to do those sorts of things, you can either have people do that, or you can bring in AI to do that as well. So some of the stuff we were working with Adrian was saying, right, we've got this automated process in the middle, but we need to have this unstructured data, these free-form emails coming in. That's where the AI is taking those, understanding the intent of what the person wants to do within that, converting that into something that then the computers can understand, and then you can start to process it automatically. Hopefully that's a good enough explanation.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, no, that's a really comprehensive answer, and well done for remembering all of it, you know, all of my questions. So to me, AI seems like something completely untenable for somebody like the GSA to undertake. I imagine it being incredibly expensive. So you've obviously talked about developing the business case and the value of it. I'd be interested to get Adrian's view on that. You know, how do you develop the value proposition, and how expensive is it? And then also, Shamek, obviously you've embedded it. It'd be interesting to get your view on that as well.
Sure. Well, from my point of view, the charging process is a really interesting conversation, because there's a temptation to approach this by charging for the effort, the clicks, what the machine is actually doing. But that's only part of the story. The real value is in the value that's actually created and mitigated, the risk that's mitigated through the activity. So if you were to look at that business process that you have in some way automated or used machine learning around, and you were able to understand that you'd been able to process cases faster, there was less error, more accuracy, customers were complaining less often because their cases were solved faster and more accurately, and you put all of those elements together, and that's where the business case, the value case, lies. So it's not just in well, we've developed a tool and it's taken us this long, and it costs our subscriptions cost this much, and therefore we're going to charge you a fraction of that plus a markup. That doesn't tell the appropriate story, because these tools are complex and they are challenging. You need to be able to go on a journey with a client or a customer, or indeed your leadership, which shows how you're creating value out of the activity, or how you're saving cost, or how you're mitigating risk, or whatever the criteria might be, or how many more candidates go through the process effectively and stay longer in their roles. And you can start to build out then the different elements of value that are being created.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think it all comes down as very kind of business case specific, right? You can have a kind of a high level overarching goal, like can we improve the overall quality of the recruitment process in our case, but then you can break it down into a number of smaller metrics that you can trace to see to what extent AI can move the needle on that. For example, in our case, it was like, can we capture more data than in the traditional recruitment process? Right? Is the time that the candidate spends actually in doing this data entry shorter than in the benchmark, which is the existing system, right? Things that are quite more difficult to measure, such as to what extent are we improving the user experience, right? Is the user actually more kind of satisfied after going through that, or the length of the process itself? But ultimately, it all comes down to the quality of the match, right? Like, has the organization made the right decision at the end? And I think, as someone is running an AI experiment, they should be looking across those different stages of the process and trying to monitor these metrics and see, if this moves the needle.
Okay, thanks for that, Jem. Right, you've got your hand up. Paul, do you join the conversation?
Hello. Yeah, thanks, Kerry. I'd reflected on some of this, and I'd seen a really fabulous AI speaker talk about data scientists being kind of explorers on a Pacific Ocean, swimming out in a canoe and finding an island, and then swimming back, paddling back to the main base and saying, hey, look, we could go over there. but there being a distinction between a data scientist using tools and software to discover things and opportunities, and then building business cases to colonize said island, and those being very different things. And I suppose there's a wonderful thing about using AI to discover things you couldn't conceive of, because, you know, AI's power is doing things humans can't think of, if that makes sense, and finding patterns, and then using those opportunities to build business cases. And then I remember another speaker, I think it was from a bank, he said, you know, his boss was going, let's do AI, let's look at all this data, but there wasn't necessarily a purpose. And so they were looking at all their data and not necessarily being specific, and there being some value in having a vision and combining that with recognizing discovery and implementation as separate pieces. So that this conversation makes me think about that, and recognizing there's different applications. And it's wonderful when you see a great idea materialized into something real, like we've seen some examples of just then.
Yeah, I think, you know, it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning about having that strategy in place, understanding the business objectives and the challenges first of all is really important, rather than just saying let's do some AI. But there is, you know, one of the benefits of AI, and I always say this, is you don't necessarily need to know the question to ask the data. You can almost, and I'm oversimplifying this, but throw the data into the AI, and it'll come up with correlations, you know, just like, you know, in Shemek's visualization with, you know, looking at the dream candidate, kind of finding those correlations that you might not have seen before. But you've kind of got to have a thesis to start with to give you a little bit of focus on that. Otherwise, you're just going in blind, and you might come up with some very strange, you know, because it's not necessarily correlation, could be causation as well. So you've got to understand what your data's saying, etc. So the idea of a data scientist explorer, I think is a really good one, but they've got to have some kind of map, I think, to go forward with.
I love your telecoms mast case study. Andrew.
Yeah, actually, yes, that's probably a good one, because one of my clients, they manage all of the masts for EE and 3 around the country, 20,000 masts, and we wanted to actually see if we could predict failure of some of the components of the mast. Actually, you know, it sounds quite boring, but aircon and fan units. But if they didn't work, then the cabinet overheated, and then the mast went down. So it was kind of this knock-on effect. So if we could do that, it'd have a lot of benefit, because you wouldn't have to send engineers out in the middle of the night to the middle of nowhere to fix these masts. So we had lots of data, like the historical ticket data when these things went wrong previously, and very importantly, smart meter data. So the smart meters on each of the cabinets, and we fed the data in, looking for these correlations. And actually, the signal that the AI found was in tiny changes in the current going into these particular units, and it was able to predict with an accuracy of about 50%, which is really good for the next month, whether this thing was going to fail or not. So it was really useful results. But no human would have thought, I wonder if, you know, if we can look at the current going into these things and actually then be able to look at the patterns and identify those patterns within the current to make the prediction. AI did that, and it found those correlations all by itself. So that's I think where the magic of AI comes in.
Okay, staying on that sort of theme, how mature is the adoption of AI, you know, across the country and organisations at the moment? And are we seeing it being adopted in a similar way as we saw automation being adopted? And that was that, you know, people were doing small POCs and proof of concepts and pilots, and really we should be taking a much more strategic approach to AI. So what's your views on that, Adrian?
I think this is much more in Andrew's territory, to be honest with you. From personal experience, you find pockets of activity around problems, and there is less of a strategic view. It's kind of the way businesses work, isn't it? If your silo lead has a problem, they'll look for a solution for it. But where does that approach bubble up until it's got proper proper governance and view across the piece? Is that owned by the CTO or CIO? Where does that sit? So I don't know if that is wider, the truth across the wider business, Andrew.
I think, yeah, that's definitely true. I think you're right in that, there's a plethora of POCs, proof of values going on, just as we had with RPA as well. I think the challenge with AI is the effort to do a POC in AI is actually, is more than you would with RPA. You have to gather all this data together. So, there's investment in time and effort and money that you have to put in. And even if that POC is successful, you may get a spreadsheet with some nice predictions of something, customer churn or demand or whatever. But a lot of people then think, well, now what? Now what do I do? I've got a nice spreadsheet, but the AI is only going to be valuable if it's integrated into the day-to-day processes. If somebody's presented with that information, when they sit down in the morning on their system and they can actually action it, that's where the value of AI comes in. And the other piece is actually that proof of concept that they've chosen. Maybe they've, a competitor's done it, so that's why they've done it, or they've read about it somewhere, so that's why they've done it. But actually, if you've gone through the AI strategy and identified all these different opportunities and prioritized them, maybe that one was 10th on the list, and there's 9 other things they could have done which would either given them more value or they could have done quicker. So that, and I would say this, wouldn't I? But that strategy piece is so important that it doesn't then waste your effort. And gives you that direction and able to articulate the vision going forward, so that your POCs actually fit into that journey, rather than just these random ad hoc effort that may or may not succeed.
So when you do your list and you create your heat map, is there a sort of like standard top 5?
No, it depends on the business very much. Every business, businesses have similar themes. They want to reduce costs, they want to improve customer service, reduce risk, etc. They're all there, but there's many more subtleties within that, and it depends on the data that they have within the organization, what they're trying to achieve, what their priorities are. So it will change, but as some of it is around. So I work with housing associations, for example, quite a lot. A big challenge for them is rent arrears. So one of the things that keeps coming up in housing association is obviously let's predict rent arrears. Those tenants that are going to go into arrears next month is really, really useful information to have, because then you can intervene early within that. So, but other classic ones like customer churn, predicting demand of services, predicting calls coming into a contact center, those sorts of things are really good. And then some of the NLP ones, like Adrian and Shemek mentioned about, using it to pass CVs, using it to read emails coming through as well. Shemek, I don't know if you've got any more good examples there.
I would actually echo that. I think we are still quite early in the technology adoption curve, right? So if you think that, you have innovators and early adopters, I think we should probably analyze it on a case-by-case basis. There are some kind of processes that are more advanced in that, but before we reach kind of the early majority and having AI adopted widely, I think it's still a few years to come. Why? Because it's way more complex than the robotic automation, and there are many more other questions, right? Like, how do we avoid bias? How do we make sure we can audit the results of what these algorithms are producing? How do we make sure we are not profiling people too much and we are actually not crossing some of the legal boundaries? So I think all of these questions are yet to be asked. And some of the organizations are asking them, but it's still early in the game. I think it's another probably 5 to 10 years before we can experience some kind of broader adoption across various use cases.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I mean, we are actually at time, but I did want to ask that one last question, and that is about the governance of AI. Obviously, there's a lot of concern about the use of data and how do you avoid bias? So just a quick answer from each of you on that question. So Adrian, I'll go to you first.
I think it's a really, really important, challenging and potentially difficult question. And it does involve, I think it involves being very, very clear on what your intentions and objectives are. If you are actively looking for bias, you will more likely to find it than if you blindly accept the truth for the truth. So I was listening to, I think it was a Desert Island Discs, there was an ethicist on who said that there can be no ethics without truth. And I like that concept, because unless you can get to the truth of what's happening in that system, you can't decide whether it's ethically okay or not.
Okay, thank you. Shem?
Yeah, I think it's also about the data that it's used, right? You can consciously select not to use some of the data. Like in our case, it was obvious, like we removed all of the gender, ethnicity, even names out of the equation, right? So it's not considered. So the data coming into the process was already anonymized to a large extent, right? And this is how you can kind of proactively eliminate some of the potential bias that would be happening, right? So my advice would be also look at it, from the input to the AI and machine learning algorithms. Can you govern the data already at that stage, right? Don't only look at the output and what's happening inside, but also look at what's coming into the equation.
Yeah, that's great. And last word from you then, Andrew, please.
Yeah, the other element of this is unconscious bias. So all of us will probably say we're unbiased. We're not racist, etc. We're not misogynist, but there's unconscious biases are in all of us. So when you're thinking about the team you're either employing or you're bringing in from as a supplier point of view, that team needs to be as diverse as possible. They need to be as mixed race or mixed races as possible, mixed genders as possible. If your AI team is all white men, then you're going to have bias in there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. It's a great way to think about it all. So thank you all of you for joining. So I think the webinar is going to be made available. Contact details of the speakers are going to be made available. So any questions, please do come either back to the GSA or to our speakers directly. So so thanks for joining, and thank you very much for participating, Andrew, Adrian, and Shemek. All right. Have a great day.
Thank
you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.